What if I told you that an unknown substance could be stored inside your body right now, causing a mutation of cells, infertility, and an assemblage of other health issues for decades to come? This nightmare has become the reality for millions across the country as a result of contamination through toxic waste. Hence, I am here today to inform you all about the solution, the Superfund program, enacted under President Jimmy Carter in 1980. The Superfund is a United States federal program designed to fund the cleanup of hazardous waste, formulated in response to an environmental disaster in Love Canal, New York. According to NewYorkPost.com, residents began reporting chemicals oozing into their backyards and basements after a harsh winter dredged up the contents of an abandoned canal where Hooker Chemical Company had dumped nearly 22,000 tons of chemical waste 30 years prior. In the 70s, reports of miscarriages, urinary and kidney problems, and mental disabilities in children hit the federal government. In turn, President Carter issued a disaster declaration which resulted in the evacuation and compensation of more than 900 families. Left to tend to the ghost town, a $230 million cleanup took place that involved capping the canal with clay, a plastic liner, and topsoil. The events that took place at Love Canal drew national attention towards the effects of hazardous waste on the environment as well as the people. Over the next few years, legislation was composed which aimed to prevent the perpetuation of exposure to hazardous waste. The result? Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or Superfund. Today, we will discuss the program's impact on St. Louis, Michigan, subsequent a disastrous mix-up at Velsicol Chemical, the health issues characteristic of the region's descendants to this day, and the solutions being offered under the Superfund, as well as their costs. In times of environmental disaster, the work of the EPA Superfund and many devoted community members may sometimes prove more daunting than expected. So if you take a look at this map, you'll notice the disbursement of red dots as representative of Superfund sites in the United States. Now, in order for a site to qualify under the Superfund Act, multiple stages of assessment must be performed, ranging from base-level walkthroughs to the collection of samples for testing. A hazard ranking assessment determines the risk level of the hazardous material to human and environmental well-being. If a site meets the qualifications, it is taken under the wing of the Environmental Protection Agency, and funding will be allocated for cleanup. Today we are going to hone in on the 18th most polluted location in the country, just 5 miles down the river, St. Louis, Michigan. The town is home to only about 8,000 people, but made its mark on millions as the site of the United States' most devastating agricultural disaster. It all started with a negligible mix-up within the walls of the Velsicol Chemical Corporation. By some grace of absolute stupidity, a fire retardant chemical called PBB, or polybrominated biphenyl, was mixed into livestock feed, both of which the company produced. And so, over the course of the next year, this combination went, undetected, into the bellies of livestock. In turn, 70 to 90% of Michiganders were exposed to PBB via consumption of contaminated milk, eggs, and meat. When the mistake was realized, farmers were forced to dig deep trenches into which they herded and killed all of their livestock. The government sought to keep the issue quiet upon the realization that so many people had been contaminated to a point of no return, quietly removing these products from shelves and placing a gag order on a Big Rapids vet who sought to go public with the issue. While most suffered only minor exposure, some went on to experience critical health issues and sickening, impactful losses. For example, one Somerton family reports having witnessed 4 infant deaths, 2 of which were incredibly gruesome, according to the Morning Sun, with one toddler having died from a heart attack and another from cancer. The mother had merely eaten contaminated meat, while the father worked for Velsicol. Studies performed by Emory University show that Velsicol employees maintain the highest contaminant levels, with the company's Julius Hyman patenting 5 of the 12 dirty dozen organic pollutants. Contamination features 3 tiers, according to author John Moyer. The first tier being the farmers and Velsicol employees in direct contact with the contaminant. The second tier being those that consume the contaminant. And the third tier being the offspring of the first and second tiers. So by this principle, and by data which shows the perpetuation of multi-generational health defects, PBB and DDT remain within and affect the bodies of many Michiganders to this day. In fact, if you take a look at this cancer cluster map, you'll find that Michigan appears almost highlighted as a hot cluster, or region characterized by large numbers of cancer cases. Increased cancer rates have been a defining factor of many Superfund sites, from Love Canal to the site of the 2010 Mexico Gulf oil spill. However, However, humans are not only are humans suffering the damages, with vast migrations of birds falling ill to this day. In fact, I've noticed dozens of dead robins around town in recent years. I've been asking around as to why for quite some time when I began research for this presentation, only to stumble upon an article explicitly stating, "Birds are dying in central Michigan from decades-old DDT pollution." Now, considering the bipolar seasonal shifts we've witnessed, I cannot attribute these deaths entirely to DDT poisoning. That being said, a collection of bird carcasses sent to Michigan State University in 2014 tested positive for acute DDT and PBB poisoning, according to MichiganRadio.org. These birds had 10 times the concentration in their brains that causes death in laboratory animals, dying in a series of spasmodic convulsions. While we are apt to prioritize human lives above those of other species, it's important to recognize the drastic toll such losses can take on an ecosystem. So now that I've brought you up to date on the status of the issue, let's get into efforts taken by the EPA Superfund to backpedal contamination. Originally, Velsicol was able to get off paying only $38 million of the estimated $500 million it would now cost to resolve the issue. According to MotherJones.com, the Velsicol Chemical Corporation was then torn down, a thick bentonite capsule built around the site to prevent hazardous waste from leaching into the Pine River. However, that capsule began breaking down about a decade ago, allowing these contaminants to enter the water supply. Hence, ELMA has partnered with St. Louis in a $40 million attempt to reroute a portion of our water supply from the treatment plant to our eastern neighbors. Furthermore, a group called the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force has assembled to advocate progress at the site of the factory, the dumping grounds, and the burn pit. This group works in collaboration with the Environmental Protection Agency, sponsoring regional health surveys and public meetings regarding the sites. To really get an insider's perspective, I interviewed Elma College professor Ed Lorenz, who has been a member of the task force since 1988. He even wrote a book on the issue, which was awarded Best Book on Michigan History in 2012. He has invited me to join the task force, stating that there's much left to do, and we need a new generation to take over. Mr. Lorenz brought me up to date on the status of the sites through a series of links. According to EPA.gov, the EPA approved $9.7 million towards a project covering 2 of the 54 acres which comprise the major site. Implementation of the in-situ thermal treatment system took place in January of this year, marking the beginning of an extensive process. The in-situ resolves soil and groundwater contamination using extremely high temperatures to vaporize the contaminant into a collective device for disposal. In the meantime, multiple operators must reside within range of the machine to monitor its progress and prevent major malfunctions. In addition, a group of Michigan teachers is working to incorporate the story of Velsicol and the Pine River into curriculum as framework for environmental education. Overall, there's much work left to be done. In the meantime, it's incredibly valuable that St. Louis has clean drinking water, strong initiative, and their foot in the door in terms of Superfund support. So now that you understand the magnitude of the issue at hand, we'll cover the cost. Well, not literally. That's left to a federal budget allocated towards the cause, and the tax dollars of community members. And that system has worked for quite some time, allowing 375 sites to be dealt with and taken off the national priorities list, according to NaturalGeographic.com. However, the Trump administration has been slashing funding in all environmental respects, including national parks, and taking such measures as removing limitations on fossil fuel emissions for big business. The Superfund has seen no different fate, suffering a 30% budget reduction under Scott Pruitt, a man who has sued the EPA numerous times capitalizes on the fossil fuel industry, and is among the climate change is a hoax crowd. The Guardian has proclaimed Pruitt Trump's most adept and dangerous hatchet man, regularly commended in administrative meetings for his deregulatory efforts. It is clear that the program's initiatives will not be driven under the current administration, but after the hours of research I've devoted to Superfund sites, I can genuinely say that community members have the strength and motivation to do so themselves. Today, I've informed you all about the Superfund program, enacted under President Jimmy Carter in 1980. The Superfund is a United States federal program. No, we already knew that. We have discussed the events leading to its enactment, the standards a site must fall under so as to qualify, and the Velsicol disaster that led to St. Louis, Michigan's qualifications. Furthermore, I've informed you all on the health issues characteristic of the region's descendants to this day, and the solutions offered to prevent further perpetuation of exposure to the hazardous waste that plague their soil and groundwater. For decades, improper disposal of hazardous waste, and even just ridiculous negligence, have led to horrific loss and economic turmoil. While the current administration places less emphasis on the environment and inherently its effects on individuals, it's important to recognize the efforts of millions of community members across the country. After all, Dalai Lama once said, "We are the only species with the power to destroy the world and also the capacity to protect it." Thank you.